I'm Shalina Tobin, aka PoshNoshGal. Today I'm with the brilliant chef Tom Sellers. Tom learnt his craft with some of the most famous chefs in the world, including Thomas Keller and Tom Akins, and he now runs the fantastic Michelin Stars Story restaurant just down the road from me here in South London. Hey Tom, how are you doing?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Enjoying your orange?
Eating an orange, yeah, it's nice. You know, you've got to get your 5 a day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so pleased that Story is reopening on the 13th of August, and we're actually already booked in with you. But you must be really excited to get going.
Yeah, it's been a challenging period, not only for myself, but I think for the whole industry and the world. So, yeah, I don't know actually if exciting is the right word. Probably more apprehensive than anything actually now with the reopening. I think almost feels like we're starting from the beginning again. We kind of are, I think, just in terms of kind of navigating through a very different time.
Yeah.
But you know, I think when you spend your whole life doing something and then it gets taken away from you, you have a lot of time to think about things slightly differently. And I guess without being too deep, you know, just kind of process everything that's gone before and how you see the future ahead. And I think it's going to be a very different time, especially in the very beginning. But I think being able to open the restaurant doors again and cook is something obviously that is hugely important to myself and to the team. So it's exciting. We're only a couple of weeks away now and we'll be able to open the doors and welcome people like yourself and guests. And the response to us reopening has been amazing. The restaurant is pretty much full until October. We kind of released August, September, October, and it's kind of full. That's good. I guess it instills confidence in what we're doing and gives us kind of a roadmap to where we want to get to. So yeah, it's exciting times, like you said.
And have you been revising your menus and you know, just kind of reinventing yourself again?
I don't know if reinventing is the right word. Probably, I think we've had time to obviously kind of, you know, you always have to look back to go forward. So I think in terms of the repertoire and our cooking style, and I guess the identity of our food is something that is very important to myself. So I think just looking at that closely and deciding on how we want to reopen and how we want to be perceived and what we want the experience to be for the customers and the guests, I think is something that we've focused on through this time. I think the first part of the kind of lockdown period was about stabilizing the business and protecting it and making sure that we'd be in a position to be able to reopen when we were allowed. And then I guess phase 2 was about adaptation to what we need to be able to do, what requirements we need to be able to meet for us to open through COVID. And then I guess the final stage was, okay, how do we want to be represented? You know, I think for me, I've always struggled with compromise and dilution of what I perceive to be the best dining experience possible. So obviously with rules and regulations, there has to be some compromise. So I think it was just about discussing that with my team, understanding what we can and can't do and what effects that has, I guess, in our environment, and not only to ourselves. You know, I have a huge duty of care to my staff, but also to our guests. So yeah, it's definitely been a time of I guess deep thought planning. You know, I think we've taken a very measured approach to the way we're reopening a restaurant, and I think that is probably been, you know, the majority of my time spent has been very carefully measuring how we're going to reopen and making sure that we give the best representation of ourselves possible.
Yeah, and I mean, have you managed to retain all of your staff?
Yeah, so I have an amazing kind of board, and my FD is amazing, and you know, I have huge credit to them through this time. You know, obviously, you know, I own the restaurant and I'm kind of the driving force, but there's a massive team behind me that advise and support and guide. And, you know, they really, through this time of, like I said, just amazing. So, yeah, we managed to retain everyone. Obviously, we closed the restaurant when Boris kind of said that restaurants needed to close and the hospitality sector was going to stop. So we closed and we placed everyone onto furlough, and we put some schemes in place to help the staff support them. My first job was to try and keep retention at 100%, which we've been able to do. And then with the staggered, measured approach of reopening, hopefully essentially basically everyone will eventually come off furlough in different stages and times, depending on roles and things like that within the restaurant and the company. So yeah, we managed to keep everyone.
Amazing. So you mentioned support earlier on. During lockdown, you've been supporting Maddox Gallery to help raise funds for the NHS. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think kind of started way back when the pandemic first hit. The restaurant was still open, and we, you know, it was that kind of really crazy 10 days where nobody really knew what was going off, and I guess we were just waiting for the announcement to say we were going to close. And you saw obviously through social media platforms that we were entering into probably one of the most dangerous times that we'll ever see in our lifetimes. And, you know, I think just, I don't know, I've always been somebody that, I like to take action just generally. I think it's something that is just built within me, is to always try and, you know, move forward. And actually it all started really, I saw a picture on Twitter of an NHS worker going to Sainsbury's to buy something to eat, and all the shelves were empty. I think she tweeted it herself. And I don't know, I just had a moment where I was like, we can do something, even if it's something so little, or, you know, if it grows into something bigger, great. And, you know, I actually spent the last 2 days of the restaurant before we closed. I cooked food for any NHS worker, because we're super close to St Thomas and Guy's and all of these hospitals. So I got my team to reach out, and they could just turn up at the restaurant and we'd give them food to take home. You know, we were just doing kind of basic food, but stuff that was really good for you. So kind of started with that, and then it grew some momentum, and then yeah, the Maddox Gallery. So I've worked with them for a few years, and I know Jay Rutland and what he did with the David Yarrow print and stuff. And I said, look, I'll take a print. I want to contribute to that cause. And then secondly, we were working. One of my partners is Joe Cole, ex-football player, and now I guess, you know, does a lot of work for charity. He started a movement doing charity work, and I wanted to kind of try and support that where I could. And then Ian Poulter, who's another friend who I met through one of our brand ambassador deals, he wanted to do food supplies and boxes. And through the pandemic, actually, we've done several activations, and I just wanted to do it. I felt that, you know, I had the opportunity and I had the resource to be able to help where I could. And, you know, I felt that was important. And it was well received. And I think that, you know, sometimes in times of struggle, you know, the smallest gesture can go a long, long way. So we just tried to play our part, I think. And I just wanted to set an example for myself, my staff, my team, and I guess maybe the industry, to say, look, we can all play our part here. And of course, you know, I am one of millions of people that decided that they could make change. And it was amazing to see. You know, I think one of my favorite quotes ever is that there's beauty in the struggle. And I think through this time, you've seen a lot of beauty from a lot of people, however big or small their gestures may have been.
Yeah, the support has been phenomenal, especially for the NHS. It's just been amazing. So let's talk about you. You've worked with some of the best chefs in the business. How is it to work with Thomas Keller at Per Se?
Listen, firstly, I was extremely lucky. I had amazing teachers through my kind of journey of, I guess, learning my craft and understanding restaurants and food and everything that comes with that. And I was fortunate enough at a very young age. I was 18 when I moved to America. And Tom Aikens actually was instrumental in that decision. He was, you know, become, I guess, a mentor and a friend. Obviously, I'd worked for him for a period of time, and I said that I wanted to see something different, and he helped me. He reached out to Thomas personally, and I guess, you know, Thomas was then more inclined to help that process, and I managed to acquire my visa, and I went over to America. And yeah, I think, look, the first thing I have to say about Thomas is probably the best restaurateur operator I've ever worked with. I think his the culture that he creates and kind of the ecosystem and his values, and his vision towards not only his guests but also his staff is second to none. I think it goes way beyond what he just puts on the plate. Of course, he's a fantastic chef, and his repertoire and their ability and the product that they use is some of the best in the world. But I think actually just the environment that he's created there, and you know, I think I definitely, that time period for me with Thomas in particular was probably more about not of course it was about the cooking, and all the focus was on that day to day in my craft and growing, but there was so much more to take from the environment that he created in terms of values and the way in which you communicate with your peers and the hierarchy of the kitchen. And yeah, it was very eye-opening for me. And at the age I was there, you know, I think you absorb so much at such a young age. And, you know, he really set the mark for me in terms of, you know, even today, there's so many things I do day to day within my restaurant now that have either been inspired by Thomas and what I saw in his environment, or were stimulated by him, or are a reflection of what they do. And, you know, his ethos and his methods, you know, that how systematic his working process is ultimately what creates amazing consistency. And yeah, I think, you know, I was extremely lucky to work with him in that time. You know, I think at that time, I think the French Laundry and per se were two of, if not the best restaurants in the world. So it was an amazing time. And actually my only regret probably is that I didn't stay longer than I could.
Right. Well, I heard somewhere that you still have your blue apron.
Yeah, so we used the blue aprons in the restaurant. So that was one of the things that, you know, the blue apron essentially it symbolizes that everyone is still learning. No one is above anyone in that sense. You know, of course, there's a hierarchy in the kitchen, but the blue apron stimulates that you're always there to learn, and you're a worker. And it's something that I obviously kind of hit home with me. And I think that, you know, as I said, I took small things from all of the chefs I worked for, but I think one of the things with Thomas was just that his mindset and how he set out his stall. So yeah, the apron, yeah, we still wear the blue aprons. And, you know, that's something that I've seen grow as well through our time. You know, last 8 years of having Story, I've seen other restaurants start to use the blue apron. And, you know, I think that Thomas inspired a generation, not just myself.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And which other ways do you inspire the chefs that work with you?
I think the biggest way to inspire anybody is to lead by example. I think, you know, I try to create an environment that is, you know, challenging day to day, but also inspiring. And I think that can only be done by my work ethic and my application to my restaurant and to my craft. But also allowing them to have the autonomy as well, to have a voice and to feel that they can impact the environment that they work so hard in, and finding that balance. You know, I think, you know, my job really is to be the visionary and allow that platform to be available to them, and to create an environment where, like I said, they feel stimulated and challenged, but also, you know, they feel that they can influence it at times. Obviously it needs to be structured and there needs to be control, but yeah, I'd say that overall that's how I try and inspire my staff, essentially, is the way I lead my life in and out of the kitchen. You know, it's so many young people want to be chefs these days and are inspired by, I guess, probably the generation before me, who really kind of changed our industry and have allowed for so many opportunities to come. I just feel probably a responsibility to them to show them the real workings and how, you know, how to meet what I perceive to be the right standards.
Right. And you mentioned Tom Aikens, he was a mentor to you as well, and you're obviously great friends with him as well. I heard you had your best meal with him in Stockholm.
Yeah, so you research. Oh, yeah. So Tom is look. Tom is somebody that, for me, is probably one of the most talented chefs that this country's ever seen. On a stove and what he puts on the plate. I think he's had difficult times outside of that with media and other circumstances, and you know, I think how I see Tom is probably very differently to most. You know, he was extremely hard on me at times as well in my younger days. You know, he kind of, you know, I started my career with Tom, and I would say that when I left his restaurant, he had built me to a point where I could have survived in any kitchen in the world. I could have held my own, and he made me understand the true value of hard work. But also his imagination with food, and so many years ago, he was so progressive. He was so far ahead of his time. And I know if you speak to any chef of caliber in the industry, in terms of Tom's cooking ability, he sits amongst the giants for sure. And yeah, look, we grew a friendship. You know, I've known him now, close to 15 years. You know, I started with Tom when I was 16 years old. So, you know, I spent time with him personally and his family, and you know, he advises me a lot in the background, and I think that, you know, he's one of them that, you know, made mistakes, and he likes to pass the knowledge on, and he advises well. And you know, at times we try and get together, and he called me actually and was like, look, I've got this reservation booked in Stockholm at a restaurant called Franson. It's in a couple of days. Do you want to come? And I was like, oh, let me see if I can move a few things around with the diary and work. But it was one day. We literally flew there, had lunch, and flew back.
Brilliant.
And yeah, it was just, look, I'm very vocal about, you know, I'm not one of them people that shy away from, I can leave a restaurant and be annoyed at how good it is. And that inspires me and it pushes me, you know, and all restaurants are in different stages of their journey. And, you know, I've worked at what are perceived to be the best restaurants in the world. So I think I've seen what the top level is. And, you know, I ate at Franson with not a lot of expectation. I obviously knew about the restaurant. I knew about Bjorn. I knew they just moved into a new site, and I was excited. And obviously I was going with somebody that shares such desire and love for food as I do, which is always great. And yeah, I was just blown away by the experience from start to finish. I think, of course, food was unbelievably tasty and had, you know, a great sense of identity. But I just think the way in which the customer journey works from start to finish was pretty flawless. And it's definitely, I ate there a second time, and I still say it's probably the two best meals I've ever eaten in my life. It was an amazing restaurant. If you haven't been, you must go. And to any chef that always ask me, you know, and I get asked a lot, you know, where's the best restaurant you've eaten at? Or I always say, look, Franson for me was, you know, up there.
Yeah. What about in London?
Well, sadly, we lost, for me, what I perceived to be the best restaurant in London. I was a huge fan of the Ledbury.
Yeah.
I think Brett's an amazing cook, a real master of his craft, in the sense of his, you know, 14 years he stood in that restaurant and created a fantastic environment. And I've had some amazing meals at the Ledbury. I think the one thing I always said about the Ledbury is, you know, the food, the service, the room. You know, I never left there disappointed ever. And I think when I probably ate at the Ledbury, I don't know, it's double figures for sure, because it was kind of my restaurant I would go to if I wanted to eat, you know, at a certain level. Because I think when you're a chef, like, it's difficult when you enter into restaurants of a certain caliber, your mindset can change without you even knowing. You know, it's kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Subconsciously, you know, you probably don't even want it to, but you you're entering into an environment that's so similar to your own in so many ways. You're looking at things differently. Where if I go and eat fried chicken, I'm just going to eat fried chicken because I love it and I want to have a beer with my mates, maybe. So yeah, the Ledbury, I always used to go there, and I was always inspired by certain things they were doing or the food that they were cooking. I just thought the cooking was great, and I was super sad to see that they were not going to come out the other side of this pandemic. It was definitely my favorite restaurant in London.
Yeah, it's pretty sad for a lot of other people as well. The greenhouse is closing as well, closed.
Yeah, I think, on that, I'm one of them. Like, I never want to see anybody, struggle, and it's so sad to see that restaurants are not going to make it through this. And I think it just shows you, on the inside, how fragile our industry can be, and how fine restaurants run and the margins that they run at. And it's really important that I hope out of all of this there just comes a greater appreciation for what so many of us do. I think restaurants have always been given a hard time, whether it's the way that they're reviewed and the way that they're approached, or from there's been a lot of talk in the press recently about bookings and no-shows and things like that, and people not prepared to pay a cancellation fee or a deposit. And I think overall, when people were made to stay at home for such a long period of time, I think the one thing that most people missed more than anything was great hospitality and being able to be in a great restaurant or a great bar. And it brings a certain energy and feeling which is infectious. And I hope out of this, if I could wish for one thing to come out of this, there'd just be a greater appreciation from everyone, from the general public, from journalists, from landlords, from I could go on, there's a list. But I just think we make up such a big sector of the economy. And to think only a few months ago we were being told that our industry was unskilled, through the whole Brexit thing, and a lot of people were upset by that. And I kind of sit in the background. I learned early on in my career I probably was slightly too outspoken when I was younger, so now I kind of probably try and counter that by not saying much. But I think there's an opportunity here for leaders in our field to set a certain precedent and standard about how restaurants and restaurateurs should be treated, to make sure that we can survive troubled times. And I think it's definitely been an eye-opening period of time for most.
And do you feel the support from the government has been enough with the whole furlough scheme?
I think it's one of them. People will always say they could have done more. We've never lived through a time like this. I think for myself, I probably in a more slightly privileged position to others, in terms of I don't have certain overheads or pressures on me that other operators will have. For example, if you've got to pay big rents in Mayfair or central London, if your landlords have been unreasonable, things like that, suppliers, how you ran your business day to day, I think really mattered when you came to this, depending on credit terms, etc. So I think there's a balance of being responsible as an operator and running your business correctly. And then, of course, in a time where we've never seen it in our lifetimes, have forced closure for several months. The government had to step in, because otherwise, we'd have gone to a place that nobody wanted to go to. So I think the furlough scheme for me, obviously, has been a huge support. My biggest overhead is my team and my staff. Do I think they could have done more? Obviously they just introduced the VAT reduction, which I think, being aimed at hospitality, I think it shows you that they know how fragile our industry is in terms of cash flow and how they operate. Ultimately, for me, I'm coming through it. So I've taken all the support that was there. I think, for me, the one thing I think they could have done better is how it was potentially communicated and planned. It's been, we, as operators and owners, had to be extremely responsive with very little time instead of being able to kind of plan whatsoever. And I know that that's such a difficult thing to navigate anyway, because they probably didn't know themselves. But I think, look, overall, they've done an okay job. You know, I think we'll look back and say, well, they could have done this better and that better, and that we're not through it yet either. So there's a huge amount of responsibility still on their shoulders to kind of make sure the country and people's health and safety and the economy can all restart. But yeah, look, I think for me, they did put certain procedures in place and certain support systems that have been helpful. And I think that I always say, you know, it's one of them things, right? It's, you either find a way to survive and you work through it, or you don't. You know, that's part of life. And, you know, my mindset is always that we'll find a way to get through this. And obviously the government put in measures that ease that. So yeah, I think overall, look, you can never say, you know, did they do enough? Did they not? People will always want more. That's just natural. But for me, I think I sit here and say, we've done okay.
Let's talk about story. What is the story? How did it come about?
Look, story. I don't know how many people know this, because people, I think, you know, the media kind of ran away with it, like, oh, every dish tells a story, blah blah blah, etc. And I was kind of like, well, it's not that. It's not that contrived. The restaurant was called Story purely because I felt that I was telling my story. And that was many factors. It was, I guess, you know, the chefs that I'd worked for, the countries I cooked in, the influences I'd taken definitely within the industry, but also outside, my upbringing, my parenting, where I grew up, kind of my moral compass. All of them things kind of built this person that was then going to go and open his restaurant doors and cook food ultimately that represented my story. And I felt that the name Story was extremely fitting. And then also, obviously, the second layer to that was it allowed us to build narrative around what we do in the room, and whether that be a specific dish per se, like, you know, we do many different dishes that are based on certain stories. So whether it be the Paddington Bear, or it be the candle that was influenced by kind of like the working class, my father, what he used to eat growing up, you know, it kind of then, it just gave us so many avenues. And I always was in the mindset that if you instill narrative around something that you do every day, it makes the experience more powerful. So
beef dripping candle, that is your signature dish, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's become that. I think purely, it's one of them, you hate to say, oh, I was the person that did it, but I genuinely think probably, you know, I don't think it had been done before. You know, I was working on that over a decade ago. When I was actually working at Noma, I was working on that as a personal project. And yeah, it became our signature dish, I guess, because it was so unique. And hopefully original. You know, it's so hard to do something that's original these days, because you're subconsciously influenced by so many things. And especially with all the platforms that are out there now, you have access to so much so quickly. But yeah, I think the candle became our signature, and actually, perfect example through this time period of closure, we went back to the drawing board with that specific dish. I said, look, let's look to evolve it, progress it, refine it, and we've done so. So there'll be a slightly different version that people will see when we reopen. But yeah, I'd say that that's become the signature dish, and probably the dish that's most talked about purely because of its uniqueness.
Yeah. And can you talk to me about how it's revised? How's it different?
So we actually just focused, so the methodology and the cooking behind the candle itself and the fat will never change. It took us so long to get it to where I was happy with that. So we focused on the bread, actually. We've wanted to change the bread for a while. So I've actually gone for, it's essentially a Parker House roll that we're going to create, that's proved and baked to order for every guest, and it'll be brushed with a sweet beef extract and egg wash glaze over the top. So just a different bread, a little bit lighter, something that we've been working on in the background.
Right. I can't wait to try it. I'm very, very excited about that. So tell me about the moment that you got your Michelin star.
Yeah. Um,
Were you expecting it?
uh, oh, sorry, I'm eating my orange.
It's all right.
I timed it badly. Listen, expectations are really, right? Sorry, I swore.
It's
This,
all right.
no,
Right.
but it is. I think. Look, the only expectation I had was the pressure that I put on myself. I wanted to open a serious restaurant that wasn't going to be a here today, gone tomorrow. Wasn't going to be a flash in the pan. Wasn't going to be, you know, something that people visited once and weren't to return. And I wanted to build a restaurant that offered an experience that grew and evolved, and people would have a desire to come back to and see us. And I think that was at the forefront of my mind. I think obviously my training, I'd only ever worked in Michelin star restaurants. I was surrounded by the beauty and the I guess like the sexiness of Michelin my whole life. It was just in the air.
Yeah.
So of course it was in my mind that I knew what kind of restaurant I was opening, and I knew, listen, no one knows the barometer of where you're at in terms of your cooking and how the restaurant is running other than yourself. So on that level, no, I didn't expect it because I didn't think we were good enough. I didn't think the restaurant had been open long enough. I didn't think that the food was probably consistent enough. But that was probably me being very harsh on myself. And I think, look, my relationship in my own head with things like Michelin and other certain accolades, I guess, has changed through the years. I've changed as a person, as an individual. But look, it's a very special award, and it's something that I can vouch for, that it doesn't come easy. You have to work extremely hard for it. And not only yourself, your team. And something that obviously we're extremely proud of and that we hold in very high esteem. But I think it has to be a byproduct of what you do day to day anyway. It has to be a byproduct of you loving what you do. And we love to cook, and we love to create experiences that are special for our guests. And if the byproduct of that is being awarded accolades such as a Michelin star, then that's amazing, because that's amazing for the restaurant, it's amazing for the guests, and it's amazing for the team. So the actual kind of like when I got the star was, back then, I'm old now, remember? And back then,
Yeah, really old.
then there was no awards, there was no like everyone goes and sits in a ceremony and they announce and there's a stage, and I obviously knew that it was the day the guide was coming out. I'd been reminded enough times by staff and by journalists, and they were doing predictions on social media, etc., etc. But I kind of look, it was a normal day for me. I got out of bed around 5:30. I had a coffee, and then I started to walk to the restaurant. At this time, I lived literally 10 minutes from the restaurant in a flat in Bermondsey, and I just walked. And there was always a bench that there was a bench in a park that I always used to sit on if I needed some time alone, whether that was through stress or whatever it might be, just take 10 minutes out of the restaurant and all of the craziness that was happening. And I just went and sat on the bench, and I knew that they were releasing the guide around 6, 7 o'clock. And I kind of had my phone in my hand, and a few people had messaged asking if I'd heard. And I knew that all the team were kind of looking. And then it just came up. They released it on Twitter, and it was literally A to Z. And I scrolled through, and I saw S, and I saw story, and I saw that it got the star. And I don't know, I just had a moment to myself, obviously, because I think at that time, for me, I thought about probably the journey for me had started so many years before, which people ever write about or they didn't care about then. And that's the world we live in, right? But yeah, you know, at 16 years old, I was doing 100 hours a week, and you know, I pushed as much as I could, and I made a lot of sacrifices to go and work where I worked. And yeah, I guess you just have a moment and you think about that, because ultimately, you know, that is when you see, you know, when I guess you change your dream into a goal and then you achieve that goal, there's something obviously very rewarding about that. But actually, I wasn't in the right mind frame probably to appreciate it enough. I was very young, and you know, my retort was, okay, well, we have 2 more to get. So yeah, you know, I took a moment, but then I went back to work, and the day carried on as normal. And you know, I was like, okay, well, it's time to go and get the next one. And I'm still chasing, well, not chasing that, but I'm still working towards that, I guess, in my day-to-day craft and what we do at the restaurant. And you know, we continue to want to be better every day. So yeah, I guess that in terms of like the moment, I think it's a very insular moment, if I'm honest, because it's something that only you know what you've gone through physically, mentally, you know, what you've put your body through, stress. Only you know what it truly took to get to that point. So, but also, you know, I have, you know, there's a list of people as long as my arm that played a huge factor in me getting there as well. So, yeah, I think it was just that moment, and it, you know, it is what it is, and then you go back to running your restaurant.
And how difficult has it been for you to retain that star? Or easy?
No, I don't. Listen, I don't think I ever set out. I don't ever go in the morning and go, oh, well, you know, we need to do this, this, and this. You know, because there is no syllabus. Mm-hmm. You know, there is no tick box exercise per se. You know, you don't get handed a manifest that says, okay, this is what you need to do to retain your star. So I think for me, look, I've tried to make the restaurant better every day for the last 8 years. And whether that's through the room, through the tangibles like the glassware and the crockery, whether it's through the level of labor in terms of the staff and bettering levels of service, the numbers of chefs, the quality of the product, you know, trying to find the best product in the world, whether that be the best vegetables, the best fish. You know, we strive every day to grow the restaurant in the direction that we perceive for it to be improving, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, you know, what the byproduct of that has been for us over the last 7 years is that we've retained our star. And you know, some people would say that's an achievement, and some people may say that's a disappointment. It depends how you look on the spectrum. So, no, look, I think for us, like, how difficult has it been? Running a restaurant is difficult, period. You know, there's so many factors to consider. And I think that the finer and the more bespoke you want to make the experience, the more work and refined focus is required. So, you know, with a restaurant now that only has 10 tables, that doesn't print a menu, that cooks for each table individually, that, you know, that works with what we perceive to be some of the best products in the world, that has gone from a team of 19, 20 to a team of 47. You know, for me, I obviously see the progress, and you know, that makes me very proud. And the product of that has been that we've retained our star. So, you know, the journey is, and look, the journey is, we're still beginning. You know, I'm learning every day. You know, we are, as I said, my job is to make sure that restaurant stays there.
Yeah.
And it's forever evolving and growing and progressing, and you know, that's my focus. So we focus on that, and I love to cook, and I'm very comfortable, and I'm very proud of my team and what we're doing at the minute and what we were doing before the pandemic. So, you know, we'll continue on. You know, we pick the bike back up on August the 13th and we carry on riding.
I wanted to talk about your book, A Kind of Story. So what gave you the idea to come out with, it's more of kind of an a story about your life instead of recipes.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what? I'll be really honest. I had no desire to do a book. My agent at the time was like, look, Tom, there's 5 or 6 publishers that are interested in working with you. And I was like, look, you know, if I was going to write a book, this is what I'd write. And I spent probably the weekend and I wrote probably 2 pages of what I wanted to do. And it was probably a very selfish and internal thing. But I said, look, I'm not ready to write a recipe book. I'm not ready to write a book about my restaurant. You know, and I look back now and I look how far we've evolved and changed and grown and matured. And I feel that I was right in what I was saying. So yeah, I was like, look, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write something that's real and raw because that reflects me and who I am. And it's going to be open and honest and liberal. And, you know, this is what I want to do. I want to, and people pick it up and read it, whether they enjoy it or not. I want them to know that when they turn the page, I wrote it. It wasn't written by someone else, or it wasn't pushed in a certain way or a certain dynamic. And I was very lucky. I got the opportunity to do that, you know, and not many people do. You know, Orion, the publisher, Amanda, who worked on with the book, you know, was amazing. She put no pressure on me to, you know, at one point we weren't even going to have pictures of food in the book. That changed slightly over time, but, you know, it took me nearly 3 years to get the book finished. And, you know, it's a reflection of my mindset back then, which is very different to my mindset right now.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is difficult to come to terms with. I don't read it and cringe, but I read it and realize that how much your life changes. And yeah, I think, you know, the book's a reflection of what it took for me and certain things that I went through. And, you know, people always ask me, especially people in the industry and especially young chefs, like, oh, you know, how did you get to where you were? And I think they think there's some kind of magical kind of formula, but there really isn't. You know, I come from a very normal background. You know, and I just did 3 things as well as I could. You know, I worked really hard. I applied myself really as much as I could. And I tried to be as disciplined as I could. And the results came from that. And I think the book is an insight into the mind of someone that, you know, was hell-bent on achieving something. You know, I always remember that, you know, school wasn't really for me in the sense of, not that I wasn't an academic, just that I found it very difficult to be stimulated in a classroom. And I remember, you know, you do them kind of career days at school, and I never forget this teacher saying, oh, well, you know, what are you going to do? I was playing a lot of sport at the time, and I remember her saying to me, well, what are you going to fall back on? You know, you need something to fall back on. And I never really understood that concept, because I was like, well, I'd rather just kind of decide what I want to do and work really hard at that. And if that fails, then at least I guess like I'm falling forwards and I know what I'm falling onto, right? It's like, that's what it is. And I never really understood the kind of like make a compromise if you don't actually get what you want. And yeah, when the day I decided I wanted to be a chef and a cook, I decided that, okay, well then I need to give everything I can to this, and nothing less will do. So I think the book is just a little bit of an insight into where my mind was at that time, and certain influences in my life that shaped, I guess, who I am then, who I was. And I think the book finishes, I wanted to write the book in a way that hopefully it finishes by realizing that, you know, it was a part of my life, and it's definitely still open. And, you know, we carry on seeking ourselves in what we do. And, you know, it was very personal, I think, the whole journey of actually writing it. So, yeah, I feel pretty lucky that I had the opportunity to write it, actually.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful book, both physically and the way it's written, and I love the honesty in it. So, as I said earlier, my husband's kind of been reading it. He hasn't let me touch it, actually. I've just kind of managed to skim through it, but I'm going to read it properly. There was one little bit that I found in there. You talk about being 26 forever. What's that about?
Um, I think so much happened to me in that year. And things that, as I said, you're very young and you're very green, and you think that, look, this is what I want to do, and that's all I'm going to do, and this is what it's going to turn out like. And I don't know, I felt that for a long time I was forever judged on that 1 year of what I'd done. And I felt at times some of that was very rewarding. I think if I look at what I'd achieved by the age of 26 and what was happening to me in that time was very much, I probably never really believed it would happen. And then on the other side, I felt how fickle the world can be potentially, I guess, in the sense of, am I forever going to be judged on this year, and everything will be, that will be a benchmark for everything that I do now moving forward, and compared to and kind of modeled a certain way by certain outlets, in terms of this kind of rock star chef image and things that I may or may not have said, or what, it was such a much more multifaceted scenario than I probably ever imagined it would be. And yeah, I think just, I felt like, well, am I just going to be 26 forever because I won't be allowed to move forward by other people and by other people's, I guess, view on me and opinion. So, and I felt that. I think I'm quite deep when I go away and I think about things, and I felt that I wanted to write about things like that in the book, because I think certain people, not only in my industry, but definitely other industries too, will be able to resonate with that. And there's lots of little bits in there like that probably a little bit more, there's a bit more to it than people can see on the first read potentially.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm really looking forward to reading it. But are you going to come out with a second book?
It's funny you say that. Actually, we had I had a few conversations early this year. People had asked me about books and potentially writing another one. And look, I think, I'd like to eventually write a book that is probably a bit more reflective on the restaurant day to day, and
sharing recipes, that kind of thing.
Say again? Sharing
recipes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, look, eventually I'd like to go out there and put the candle in as a recipe and things like that. And I've probably got a collection of dishes now that ultimately, I've become classics of what we do and haven't changed very much. They've refined over the last 2 or 3 years. But yeah, I think I'm at a point where the repertoire is getting to a point where we'd have enough to fill that book. So, I think that obviously as well, story, you're only ever an endorsement of what you do in your craft day to day. So look, whether it's book deals or TV deals or all of these things now that the world can offer you, like they will only ever be as successful as what you do day to day in your life. And that's me in my restaurant and cooking. So, I think that, look, the journey's not finished for me with the restaurant, and we have a lot more to achieve, and I will achieve it, because that's what we set out to do, and we won't rest until we do it. So, but yeah, look, I think the answer is, will I write another book? Yeah, I'd like to think I will eventually. Cool. Will I write several books? Potentially, when it's all said and done at the end of the journey, when I'm, long gone and old, maybe there'll be another one that could be helpful for people that will look back and stuff like that. But yeah, look, I think that the next book is something that's been spoken about already by my management, and we've had a few discussions. But I think, from knowing through this conversation, if we do the book, I want to do the book a certain way, and I want it to have a certain feel, and I want it to represent something very specific. And like the first book has, it represents something very specific. I want the second book too. And if a publisher gives me that opportunity, then we'd definitely consider it for sure.
Yeah, amazing. And so in there, I didn't get to read it again, but there's a kitchen disaster story. Can you tell us about that? Your biggest kitchen disaster?
Was that per se?
Is that where you cut your finger off?
Oh no, yeah, no, there's
What's like,
yeah, that's the biggest.
is there another one that's your biggest
No,
hit?
no, the finger one is, I guess, in terms of I guess, like, just magnitude of like disaster, really. You know, it's common knowledge now, is in the book, but yeah, I hurt my finger pretty badly. Severed all the tendons in my right hand and my little finger. And sorry,
How did you do that? Were you chopping a?
I did it in my temper, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. I was upset by something, and I went to stab the knife into a chopping board.
Oh God.
Yeah, and it slipped, and the heel of the knife hit my finger, and the rest is history. It was a.
That's a lesson about not to be angry with and being alive.
You know, but it was a lesson. It was a lesson about self-control. It was a lesson about, you know, don't take things for granted. Like, you know, my hands are my tools to what I do every day. I need them. They're definitely the self-control, and you know, it was a time in my life that was extremely challenging in that sense. You know, I had to move back out of London because I couldn't afford to pay rent because I couldn't work. And yeah, it was a time where it was difficult for me, and I have a constant reminder of it because I can't straighten my finger, and it hurts when in the cold, and it hurts when, you know, sometimes I'm chopping now and blah blah. But yeah, it was a bad one. The crazy thing about it was when I did it, I was like, oh, that doesn't feel right. And it didn't really bleed that much. And I was like, you know, I was one of them. I kind of just wrapped it in cling film and carried on working. And I think I worked for about 3 or 4 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, and then I remember at the time, the restaurant manager, I said, this isn't right, is it? And I was like closing my hand, and I was telling my hand to close, but this finger was just staying there like that. And I was like, that's not right, is it? And he's like, yeah, I think you should probably go to the hospital. So I literally just got a taxi to the walk-in centre, I think. And someone saw me, and they literally said, oh, okay, we're sending you to this department. And the lady come out, she's like, you need to get someone to bring you a bag. You're not going home. You're going to be operated on. Because the tendon can die and like wither away. And obviously when I told them, like, yeah, it's 5 days, they were like, are you crazy? Why didn't you come to the hospital? And I was like, well, I didn't really know what was wrong. And then, yeah, literally I went into surgery that night. 4 hours, actually, the surgery. 29 stitches in my little finger, and then a lot of rehab. And yeah, it was a long journey back, actually. You know, you realize like how fragile and how precious, you know, your body is. So yeah, that was a bit of a boo-boo.
So what was the disaster at per se?
We don't need to talk about that. I think it's in the book, so you'll read it.
You're going to make me read it.
Yeah. Now and then I'll know that you've read it.
All right. So for our viewers, they've got to read it as well now if they want to know.
Absolutely.
Well, I highly recommend everyone buys the book, even though it was a few years ago, but it is honestly a beautiful book. So please buy it. So there's one last thing. Tell me about yourself, something about yourself that I couldn't possibly know.
Oh, God.
Not in the book. Into these, something personal.
Oh, something personal.
Oh, it could be whatever you want. Let's open it up.
Something that you wouldn't know. For many years, I played ice hockey. Not many people know that. Yeah, and when I was 12, I was British champion at Taekwondo.
Oh, wow.
And there's 2 things that aren't in the book.
That's good. And also I learned earlier on you're doing boxing as well.
Yeah, listen, I've always loved sport. Like I said, well, that was definitely when I was younger. I'd just play sport all day if I could, you know, and it was whatever sport, whether it was football, whether it was ice hockey, whether it was tennis, whether it was whatever it was, I wanted to play. Some I was better at than others. taekwondo was something I did from a very young age. And now, yeah, like I said, through this time, through the COVID time, I kind of, I wanted to get back to kind of fitness, and, it's a very stimulating and rewarding process, whether that's, your personal fitness or, around others and that kind of stimulant. So, yeah, it's been nice to train through this time. And I think sport's such an outlet, I think, in terms of the way we work as well, you put so much pressure on yourself. It kind of can be a bit of escapism. I try and play football with some friends every week, even when I'm back working. So, sport's always been a big part of my life. I'm very competitive as a person as well. So it helps with that side of me as well. So yeah, sport's always been a big part of my life.
Yeah, and just one last thing, I've noticed you've got a ton of tattoos. I'm really into art, so I'm always asking about people's tattoos.
Yeah.
How many years do they go back? When did you start doing them?
Some are misspent youth. I think I got my first tattoo when I was 16 or 15.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, look, I think, it's one of them things. I'm obviously quite an expressionate person, like to express myself, and I'm quite spontaneous as well. So, look, they all represent a certain time in my life, or they all have meaning pretty much. I think my hands are probably the most talked about in terms of, just because I guess it's the hands, and I've got a 13 on my fingers.
And is it true you did all of them in Copenhagen?
The arms, so this arm was done in Copenhagen when I was, and
when you were René Redzepi in Noma.
Say again?
At the time when you were with René Redzepi at Noma.
Yeah, so yeah, that was a time we haven't spoke about, but obviously, René, probably one of the most progressive chefs the planet's ever seen. Changed a whole country's food culture. Extremely powerful in what he did, and I was lucky enough to work at the restaurant at a time when he was very much at the restaurant, and at a time where I guess it was probably the hottest ticket in the world in terms of restaurants, and to go through that time was eye-opening, and to watch René work and watch his mind work and how he approached what he perceived to be the art of cooking was extremely, I feel, like I said again, I feel very lucky that I got to witness that through that time period. And it definitely, that period of working with René and Noma definitely was the catalyst to saying, okay, I'm going to go back to England, I'm going to open my own restaurant. Because I felt if he could do it here, in the way he did it, and he had such a stubborn approach in some regards to, this is how we're going to do it here. And there was a lot of beauty in that as well. It gave me the strength to say, okay, well, if he can do it here, I can do it there. Yeah, it was an amazing time, amazing restaurant.
And you've worked with some of the most amazing chefs. Who in the industry inspires you now?
Oh, there's so many, to be honest. I think, I've always, regardless of the way people want to portray me, or I may have been portrayed, previously, like, I'm a huge believer in, the ones that have gone before are the reason that it's possible for us today. And, there's so many chefs that are the generation before me, that I guess that we kind of sit alongside now in some regards, but I've been doing it longer than me, and are probably doing it better than me in some levels. And all of them really, there's so many chefs out there that, whether it's, chefs, restaurateurs, operators, there's so many: Jason Atherton, Claude Bozzi, Claire Smith, Brett Graham at the Ledbury, Simon Rogan, Tom Kerridge, Sat Baines. There's so many. I could go on and on. There's a wealth of chefs that I've missed as well. But just all of them. They all deserve respect. They all deserve their time, because I know how hard it is to create something in this industry, and then to sustain it is even harder. So these guys have been doing it 15 years longer than I have. And, you know, I look at all of them and they all inspire me in different ways. Absolutely. I think the most inspirational figure for me through my period was probably, there were all different reasons. You know, I can't actually pick one and say he was the most influential. I think they all influenced me in very different areas of my own makeup. But I just feel privileged to be in the industry, actually, because I know, you know, it's not very often the industry get together, really. You know, it's probably the same for most industries, whether it's award nights, etc. You kind of rub shoulders with a few, but you know, so many chefs out there. You go back and you speak about Gordon and Marco P.O.I. and then Marcus Waring and Angela Hartnett, and look, there's so many, and all of them deserve the credit, the accolades, and the notoriety that they get. And you know, I guess I've always sought for my peers to respect me, and I think that, but I've always in the mindset of, you know, just if they respect me through my craft and what I do day to day, that'll be enough for me. So, you know, we keep doing what we do, and hopefully that, you know, people would speak highly of that. And, you know, I think, like I said, the industry is full of so much talent, and it's an exciting time for young people that are entering into this industry now. I think, you know, I think back and think, Jesus, like if you're a young chef now and you come to the UK or you come to London, there are so many amazing restaurants and chefs that you can go and learn from and work with.
Yeah.
Actually, for me, is like, you know, I think, wow, you know, if I grew through this time, I'd be so excited by the prospect of being able to work for all of these great chefs.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so you'll be inspiring others as well, I'm sure.
I don't think I ever think of myself like that, but if I do, if it's one small thing I do or whatever it might be, if that inspires somebody to come into the industry or want to be a chef or work that a little bit harder, you know, work them extra hours, you know, then great. Because, you know, my message to them is always the same: give 100% of yourself, and that will always be enough. So I think what I've learned is that's a rare commodity now. People very rarely actually give 100%. And the ones that do succeed.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely amazing chatting with you, Tom.
Honest pleasure.
Guys, if you want to follow Tom on Instagram, he's at Tom's Story, and I'm at PoshNoshGal.